My name is Linda. I'm 60 years old, and not long ago I lost my husband Paul to cancer. After 40 years together, watching him slip away felt like the world had tilted and never righted itself again. The house we shared in Dayton became too quiet, too hollow, filled with echoes of a laugh I'd never hear again, and footsteps that no longer came down the hall. I thought about staying, thought maybe the memories would hold me up, keep me anchored somehow. But each room whispered of him, of the life we built, and it only made me feel more alone. So when my daughter Karen suggested I come live with her and her husband, I said yes, before the offer cooled. They lived just outside Columbus, in a quiet suburb, with neat lawns and rows of identical mailboxes. The first time I pulled into their driveway, it felt like entering someone else's life entirely. Karen hugged me, told me it would be good for all of us, that it would help me heal. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe her voice still held the same warmth it did when she used to climb into my lap after nightmares. Mark, her husband, didn't say much. He helped carry in my bags, nodded politely, then disappeared into his office. I told myself he was just busy. Men grieve differently, I thought. Or maybe it was just awkward having his mother-in-law under his roof. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to overstay. I tried to make myself useful. Cooked dinner, did the laundry, and offered to watch their dog while they were at work. I even scrubbed the kitchen floor on my hands and knees one afternoon just to feel needed. Karen thanked me, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. And Mark, he barely looked up from his laptop, even when I brought him coffee the way Paul used to like it. I started to notice the little things. The sigh Mark let out whenever I walked into the room. The way Karen's voice tightened when I asked how work was. How quickly their conversations turned to whispers when I passed by. I'd catch pieces of sentences, never full thoughts, just enough to make me feel like a guest who had already overstayed. One night, I left a note on the fridge, asking if they'd like me to make roast chicken for Sunday dinner. No one mentioned it. On Sunday, they ordered takeout. I ate alone in the back room with the door half closed, pretending I wasn't hurt, pretending I understood. I told myself I needed to give it time. That grief made everyone act strangely. That once the dust settled, we'd fall into a rhythm and I'd feel like I belonged again. But every day that passed made it clearer this wasn't a homecoming. It was a layover. I missed Paul more than I could say. I missed his steady hand on my shoulder, the way he used to read the newspaper out loud, just to make me laugh. Some nights, I'd sit on the edge of the bed. They gave me a small twin tucked in the corner of the guest room and whisper his name into the dark. Just to hear it again. Just to feel like someone still remembered who I used to be. I didn't ask for much. I just wanted to matter. I just wanted someone to look at me and not see an old woman with nowhere else to go. But the silence in that house said it all. I was a presence they tolerated, not a mother they welcomed her home. It happened on a Tuesday night. I remember because I had spent most of the afternoon cooking Mark's favorite chicken pot pie with fresh rosemary just the way Paul used to make it. I wanted it to feel like a real family dinner, the kind we used to have before everything unraveled. Karen barely looked up from her phone. Mark sat across from me, sipping a beer, eyes fixed on the muted television over my shoulder. The silence wasn't new, but it felt heavier that night, like everyone was holding their breath. I tried to make conversation mentioning the neighbors' Halloween decorations, but neither of them responded. Then Mark set his fork down, not loudly, not in anger, just deliberate enough to pull the air from the room. He looked at Karen, then at me, his jaw tight. He said maybe it was time we stopped pretending this was temporary. I blinked. He said they weren't a charity, that hosting me was never meant to be a permanent arrangement, that I wasn't contributing, that I was, in his words, just another bill. I sat there, stunned. My hands trembled, but I kept them folded in my lap. I turned to Karen, desperate for her to say something, anything. She didn't. She wouldn't even meet my eyes. She just stared at the table and mumbled that maybe it would be best if I started looking for something more stable. For everyone's sake. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I nodded, stood up, and walked back to my room. My ears rang not from the words, but from the echo of their silence. I moved slowly, almost methodically, pulling the suitcase from under the bed, folding clothes with hands that didn't feel like mine. There wasn't much to take. A few changes of clothes, a framed photo of Paul and me at Niagara Falls, the scarf Karen knitted for me 5 Christmases ago that I doubted she even remembered. I zipped the suitcase, grabbed a second smaller bag and paused in the doorway. I waited just for a moment to see if anyone would come down the hall, stop me, ask me to stay. No one did. I stepped outside. The night was colder than I expected. Fall in Ohio always crept in like that, sudden and sharp. I sat on the edge of the curb, the house glowing behind me like a stage I'd been written out of. I could still hear the television through the walls, some crime drama humming along like nothing had just happened. I held the handle of my suitcase tight, not because I needed to, but because I needed something to anchor me. Cars passed 1 or 2. A jogger with earbuds in. No one looked my way. I was invisible, a woman in her 60s, sitting outside a house she used to call a lifeline. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. I didn't have a plan. My phone battery was almost dead, and I had nowhere to charge it. I remembered thinking how strange it was to feel so erased while still breathing, like grief had grown arms and pushed me right out of my own story. I checked into a motel an hour later, the kind with flickering neon signs and front desks behind bulletproof glass. The room smelled like old carpet and desperation. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the blank wall, my suitcase beside me, like a reminder that this was real. I was no longer welcome in my daughter's home, not because I did something wrong, but because I existed. That night, I didn't cry. Not at first. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, blinking against the sting behind my eyes. It wasn't just sadness. It was humiliation. I had buried my husband less than a year ago, and now I was disposable. An expense. An extra mouth. I thought of Paul, of how he used to call me his lighthouse. He said I was the reason he found his way through hard times. And now I was drifting in the dark with no one looking for me. No one is calling me back in. I texted Karen the next morning. Just 5 words. I understand. I love you always. She never replied. That silence hurt more than Mark's words ever could, because Mark never loved me. But Karen did, or at least I thought she did. And now I wasn't so sure. The motel was the kind of place people only went when they had no other option. The wallpaper peeled near the ceiling. The carpet had a damp smell that clung to everything, and the vending machine outside my door hummed like it was mocking me. I kept the blinds half closed all day, not because I needed privacy, but because the light felt too bright for someone who'd been forgotten. I didn't unpack. I couldn't bring myself to pretend this was anything but temporary, even if I had nowhere else to go. My suitcases sat near the door like they might decide to leave before I did. The bed was hard. The heater clicked like it was arguing with itself. At night, the walls carried every sound, people arguing 2 doors down. Someone coughing, a dog barking in the distance, like it had been left behind too. I tried to reach out. I sent Karen another message that first weekend, just a simple update about the weather. No response. A few days later, I sent her a photo of a sunset from the motel parking lot captioned with a heart. She didn't even open it. There were no calls, no missed messages, no one asking how I was. I stared at my phone like it might ring out of pity. It didn't. Most days I turned it off to save battery, but also because the silence felt worse when it buzzed and it still wasn't her. I tried looking for work, walked to the diner down the road, inquired at the gas station. The manager barely looked up when I asked about part-time shifts. He said they needed someone who could move fast, not someone who looked like their grandmother. I didn't argue. I just smiled, nodded, and walked back in the cold, my hands tucked in the sleeves of my coat because I'd forgotten gloves. Back in the room, I sat on the bed and stared at the same patch of ceiling for what felt like hours. The silence was loud in here. It wrapped around my ribs and squeezed until I couldn't breathe. I didn't cry every night, just some. The kind of crying you do with your face buried in a pillow, shaking silently, because there's no one coming to ask what's wrong. No one who'd even hear you. There were moments I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and didn't recognize myself. Not because I looked older, but because I looked erased, like I'd been wiped out one disappointment at a time. I stopped opening the curtains after a week. I stopped talking out loud, even to myself. I stopped waiting for the phone to light up. I told myself I was just resting, just in between things. But some part of me knew I wasn't waiting to be found anymore. I was just trying not to disappear completely. It was a rainy Thursday when I pulled out the last box from under the motel bed. I'd gone through everything else, hoping to feel closer to something that still made sense. Inside were old photos, a church bulletin from my husband's memorial, and at the very bottom, a small leather-bound book with worn edges I hadn't seen in years. It was my mother's diary. I almost put it aside, thinking I wasn't ready for more memories that might break me. But something about the weight of it in my hands made me sit down, and open the first page. Her handwriting hadn't changed since I was a child. Neat loops in blue ink. At first, it was grocery lists, church gossip, and small frustrations about the mailman or weather. But then came an entry dated June 12th. She wrote about a man, said he'd visited again, said he wanted to be with her but couldn't, that he had a family, a reputation, a legacy to protect. I thought it was just a romantic regret until I saw my name. She wrote that he loved me from afar, that I was a child born from longing and fear, that she never told him she kept all the letters, all the little checks he sent, all the promises tucked into envelopes. My hands trembled. My chest tightened. I read that he was a man of influence, that his name had to be kept secret, but she left a clue. 3 initials. RJM. And then months later, another entry. She wrote that he'd arranged for a lawyer to handle something quietly if anything ever happened to him. A trust. A sealed envelope. His name was Robert James McAllister. My heart skipped. I'd seen that name before. On billboards, in newspaper headlines. He was a real estate mogul, built half of downtown Columbus, and I was his daughter. She said the lawyer's name was Franklin. I searched online, found a Leonard Franklin, retired estate attorney, still listed at a private firm in Worthington. I didn't call. I wrote him a letter, explained everything. 2 weeks passed before the phone rang. It was him. His voice cracked when I said my mother's name. He told me he'd been waiting for this call for years, that there was something for me, something real, something mine. For the first time in months, I didn't feel broken. I felt chosen, seen. And in that moment, surrounded by peeling wallpaper and stale air, I smiled. Because I wasn't just a woman left behind. I was someone with a name, a past, and maybe finally a future. The day after I met with Mr. Franklin, something in me shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was calculating. He handed me a folder filled with account numbers, property records, and the final letter from Robert McAllister confirming the trust. I read it twice. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I needed to feel every word settle into my bones. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from sadness, but from the quiet thrill of possibility. I found a short-term rental downtown. It was small but clean, with white walls and high windows that caught the morning light. I traded my fraying sweaters for crisp button-downs, my worn loafers for low-heeled boots that made me stand a little taller. I cut my hair shorter, layered it to frame my face. I didn't want to look younger. I wanted to look like a woman who had nothing to prove. I bought a new laptop. I spent hours watching online courses about personal finance, rental law, and real estate investing. I joined forums, signed up for webinars, and subscribed to newsletters with headlines like How to Build Equity from Scratch and Landlords Who Lead. The language was foreign at first, but I kept a notebook and wrote down everything. I didn't need to become an expert. I just needed to stop feeling like prey. At first, I sat quietly in networking meetings. Coffee shops are filled with people half my age talking about flipping houses and short-term rentals. No one asked me about my past. They just saw a woman with sharp eyes and questions that cut through the noise. I took notes, asked for book recommendations, and followed up with polite emails. Slowly, people started nodding when I spoke. I wasn't invisible anymore. I began scouting properties, learning how to read listings and how to spot when something was undervalued. I paid attention to tax records, neighborhood trends, and code violations. I wasn't planning on building an empire. I just wanted to own something that no one could take from me again. There was something liberating about watching people underestimate me. They assumed I was someone's assistant or a woman trying to help her husband invest. They never guessed I was sitting on more capital than most of them combined. And I never corrected them. Power, I learned, lives in silence too. Every morning I woke up, made coffee and studied. Not out of fear anymore, but focus. I had been cast out, yes, but I had found a door no one else knew existed. And I was walking through it, not with anger, but with purpose. Because I had been small for too long. Now it was time to take up space. I was deep into a spreadsheet about local property taxes when I saw it. A 4-unit building in a neighborhood I knew well. The name of the street pulled something sharp and immediate out of my memory. Karen and Mark's address. I clicked the listing. It was subtle, buried in an auction site reserved for distressed properties. No photos, just a line about delinquent taxes and a pending foreclosure if the lien wasn't resolved within 60 days. I refreshed the listing 3 times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. The address didn't lie. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I just stared at the screen, letting the irony settle into place. The building they lived in, the one I had been pushed out of, it was about to change hands. I didn't hesitate. I reached out to Mr. Franklin the next morning. He helped me file the paperwork to create an LLC, a clean shell with no personal identifiers. We registered the name under Morning Lane Holdings. It sounded like a real company, not a woman with a bruised heart and a folder full of legal documents. The auction wasn't public. It was handled quietly between the city and pre-approved buyers. Franklin knew the language. He submitted our bid firm and clean. No haggling. Full payment, no contingencies. 2 weeks later, it was mine. I received the deed in a plain envelope with a gold seal. I ran my fingers along the edge of the paper like it might melt if I blinked too fast. I didn't tell anyone. Not out of secrecy, but because power feels better when you don't explain it. I sat at my small desk and whispered to the air. Let's see how Mark likes paying rent to the woman he called a burden. The first thing I did was contact a new property manager. Someone experienced, discreet, and used to dealing with difficult tenants. I instructed him to send updated lease terms to all residents effective at the end of the current month. No one was singled out. Every unit got the same notice. Rent would be adjusted to match current market rates. For Mark and Karen, that meant triple. I didn't gloat. I didn't imagine his face when he opened the letter. I didn't need to. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about accountability, about balance, about letting him feel what it meant to lose control without warning. 2 days after the notices were delivered, my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in months. I didn't answer. Karen left a voicemail. She said something weird was happening with their rent. Mark was angry, that she didn't know what to do. I played the message once, then deleted it. This wasn't the moment for a reunion. It was the moment they learned what silence feels like, what weight does to people who thought they'd never be the ones crushed by it. I drove past the building once late at night. I parked across the streetlights, off engine quiet. Their windows were lit. I saw shadows move behind the blinds. Mark, pacing. Karen was sitting motionless. It looked familiar. It looked like the night I left. But this time, I wasn't outside looking for a place to sleep. I was the one holding the key to every door, and they didn't even know it yet. I saw her by the boxed pasta, standing with one hand on her hip, and the other holding a small shopping basket that looked almost empty. Her hair was pulled back in a loose, careless knot, the way she used to wear it after crying. She stood still for a moment, staring at a shelf of mac and cheese, like she was weighing more than just price. I stepped behind a rack of discount cereal. My heart pounded in my chest, not from fear, but from something older, something that reached back to scraped knees and bedtime stories. I watched as she read the label, then slowly put the box back on the shelf. Her shoulders dropped, not in frustration, but in defeat. The kind of slump that doesn't come from one bad day, but from too many in a row. She checked her phone, read a message, and closed her eyes for a second, before moving on to the next aisle. I didn't follow her immediately. I stayed still, thinking about how many times I had walked this same store with her hand in mine. She used to beg for the colourful cereal on the top shelf, not knowing I'd already tucked a box into the cart when she wasn't looking. She trusted me then. I was the centre of her small world. Now I was a stranger hiding behind cornflakes, watching the woman she'd become walk past her own reflection like it didn't matter. I followed at a distance close enough to see her pick up eggs and a single can of beans, far enough that she wouldn't see me and feel ashamed. She paused again in front of the bread. Her hand reached, then stopped. Then she walked away. And just like that, the ache in my chest settled in. Not because I pitied her, but because I still remembered the way she used to come to me when things got hard. I wanted to call out, to step forward, to fix it like I always did. But I didn't. Not because I couldn't. Because I knew that sometimes the deepest kind of love is the one that waits quietly for the other person to remember where safety lives. And in that silence, I let her go. Just for now. She knocked just after sunset, a soft, hesitant tap that barely echoed down the hallway. I wasn't expecting anyone, and part of me already knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. When I opened the door, there she stood, holding a paper bag against her chest, like it was the only thing keeping her steady. Her eyes were tired red around the edges like she hadn't slept in days. She didn't smile, didn't try to explain, just said hi, quiet as a breath. I stepped aside without saying a word. She walked in slowly, pausing like she wasn't sure she was allowed to be there. I watched her take in the room, the neat kitchen, the stack of books on the table, the stillness. It wasn't home for her, but it wasn't foreign either. I offered her tea. She nodded. I put the kettle on and moved with the kind of grace you find after years of holding back what you want to say. She sat at the table. Her hands folded her shoulders tight, like she was waiting for a verdict. We didn't speak while the water boiled. The silence between us was thick, but not sharp. It felt like a blanket laid over an old wound, not to hide it, but to soothe it. When I set the mug down in front of her, she reached for it with both hands, held it like it was something sacred. We sat there, sipping slowly, breathing in the steam, and letting it fill the gaps between us. She looked at me once, eyes glossy, but not pleading. I could see the girl I raised buried under the weight of her own decisions. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't explain what happened. She just existed in the space quietly, hoping it might hold. After a while, she spoke. Just a sentence. She said she missed me. Then looked down at the tea as if afraid of what I might say in return. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't feel something, but because there was too much between us for words to fix. So I reached across the table and placed my hand near hers. Not touching, not forcing, just there. She looked up and nodded once, like she understood exactly what that meant. She stayed for another hour. We didn't talk about Mark. We didn't talk about rent or voicemails or the things we'd left unsaid for too long. We just sat there in the kind of quiet that felt more healing than anything loud ever could. When she finally stood to leave, she hesitated by the door. Then she turned, wrapped her arms around me, and whispered that she was sorry. I didn't say it back, but I didn't let go right away either. Sometimes healing doesn't start with forgiveness. Sometimes it starts with letting someone sit beside you again, even when it hurts. And that night, I let her. The meeting room smelled faintly of paint and fresh coffee, the kind of scent meant to calm people before delivering hard news. Tenants shuffled in, slowly taking their seats, some curious, others annoyed. I sat near the back, my hair tucked into a soft twist, wearing a slate grey blazer that made me look more like a consultant than someone with a history tied to these walls. Mark arrived 5 minutes late, storming in with the energy of someone looking for a fight. Karen followed close behind her steps, slower, her eyes scanning the room, until they landed on me and froze. He didn't notice me at first. His attention was on the property manager standing at the front with a clipboard. The meeting started with routine updates, building maintenance, trash pickup schedules. Then the manager paused and said the new owner of the building was in attendance and would be addressing the group. I stood. Mark's head turned like he'd heard a gunshot. His expression shifted in real time from confusion to disbelief to rage. Karen didn't speak. She just stared, her hands clutched in her lap as if they might keep her steady. I walked slowly to the front heels, tapping softly across the floor. I didn't raise my voice. I introduced myself and thanked the tenants for their patience during the transition. I said I was committed to improving the property and maintaining respectful communication with everyone living there. Mark stood up so fast his chair scraped backward. He demanded answers, called the situation a setup, said it was insane. I looked at him calmly and told him nothing had been hidden. The purchase was legal, the terms clear, and the increase is fair under market rates. He was shaking with frustration. Karen glanced between us, silent, like she finally understood that something irreversible had shifted. I didn't gloat. I didn't match his energy. I simply said that my door, like the rent, was open, but only to those who respected it. Then I turned and walked back to my seat, leaving him standing there without an audience. The room stayed quiet for the rest of the meeting, because sometimes power doesn't need volume, it just needs presence. Mark waited for me outside the meeting room, jaw clenched, arms crossed tight over his chest. He looked smaller than I remembered, like someone who had finally been shown the edges of his own importance. His voice was low, sharp, trying to provoke. He asked if I felt proud, if this were my version of revenge. I looked at him for a long moment. Not with anger, just clarity. Then I said the only thing that needed to be said. You did this to yourself. There was no yelling, no scene, just that one truth left hanging between us, heavier than any insult I could have thrown. He didn't respond. His mouth opened, then closed, and for the first time he had nothing to say. Karen stood behind him. Not close, not distant. She met my eyes and nodded, not in apology, in recognition. Like she saw me, really saw me for the first time since the night I left their house with 2 suitcases and a broken heart. I walked past them both without another word. My heels tapped against the floor like punctuation. The hallway outside was quiet, warm from the late sun spilling in through tall windows. I didn't look back, because real power isn't loud. It doesn't need to prove anything. It walks out the door, knowing it doesn't owe anyone an explanation. And that day, I didn't just reclaim dignity. I walked into the rest of my life, holding it steady in both hands.